She thought she was picking up a businessman. She was wrong. At 4:47 in the morning, in a rain-soaked airport terminal crowded with strangers, Serena Vale held up a cardboard sign with the wrong name and changed her life forever. Because the man who walked toward her wasn't a corporate executive. He wasn't her sister's boss. He was Luca DeLuca, the most feared crime lord on the East Coast, and he already knew she had made a mistake. He got into her car anyway. And the moment those cold, dark eyes found hers in the rearview mirror, something shifted in the air between them that neither of them would ever be able to explain. If you've ever made a wrong turn that led you somewhere you were never supposed to go, stay with me until the end. Like this story, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this ride takes us. The rain had been falling since midnight and showed no signs of stopping. Serena Vale drove with both hands tight on the steering wheel, her windshield wipers dragging across the glass in that exhausted, uneven rhythm that told her they needed replacing about 3 months ago. The Honda was old. The heater worked half the time. The passenger seat had a coffee stain she'd stopped trying to explain. None of that mattered at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday when her phone wouldn't stop buzzing and her sister's voice on the other end of the line was doing that thing, that trembling, feverish, barely keeping it together thing that always made Serena's chest go tight. "I need you to do this," Camilla had said. Not asked, said. "Please, Serena, I can't call in sick today. He'll notice. He notices everything." "Camilla, it's the middle of the night. His flight lands at 5:15. Gate C. His name is on the sign I texted you. Just hold it up, walk him to a car. That's it. The town car's already arranged. You just have to stand there and look like you work for me." "I'm a photographer. I look like someone who sleeps in." Serena. That was all it took. One word, her name, spoken in the voice her little sister only used when she was genuinely scared. Serena had been hearing that voice since they were kids, since their mother left, since their father worked double shifts and came home smelling like machinery and silence. That voice meant something real was wrong, and whatever wall Serena tried to build against it crumbled the same way it always had. She'd been in bed with a half-finished glass of wine and a camera card full of photos she still needed to edit. By 4:15, she was in the car. By 4:30, she'd printed a cardboard sign at the all-night FedEx on Meridian because she was not going to show up at an airport looking like she'd scrawled something on a torn cereal box, no matter what Camilla said. The sign read, Hargrove. She held it against the steering wheel the whole drive, like it might absorb some kind of meaning before she got there. Welcome. Terminal C was a different kind of chaos at this hour. Not the daytime kind. Not the rolling suitcases and crying children and overpriced coffee chaos. This was quieter and somehow worse. Delayed flights, red-eye arrivals, people wearing the particular gray exhaustion that only came from sitting in a pressurized metal tube for 7 hours. Security personnel leaning against walls with the half-conscious vigilance of people who had long ago made peace with the ungodly schedule. The fluorescent lighting managed to make everyone look slightly ill. Serena found a spot near the arrivals barrier, held up her sign, and waited. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours. Her hair was pulled back in something that had started as a bun and was now more of a compromise between effort and defeat. She was wearing a clean jacket over an old sweater, dark jeans, and the boots she grabbed first because they were by the door. She looked, she knew, like someone doing a favor for someone they loved while not being happy about it. The flight from London had landed 8 minutes early, according to the board. She watched people filter through the doors, businessmen with roller bags, a family with 2 children who were somehow still awake and talking loudly at 5 in the morning, an elderly couple who moved slowly and deliberately, the man's hand always hovering near the woman's elbow, a group of college students still wearing the glazed expressions of people who'd spent their transatlantic flight drinking whatever they could get their hands on in economy. Serena scanned every face. Nobody looked like a corporate executive named Hargrove. She checked her phone. Camilla had sent a brief description: late 40s, gray hair, blue tie, laptop bag. Serena looked back at the stream of passengers. Nobody matching that description appeared. What appeared instead was someone else entirely. She noticed him the way you noticed weather. Not a single feature at first. The whole thing at once. The height. The controlled stillness in the way he moved through the crowd, which parted for him not because it was physically necessary, but because something in the posture communicated without a word that space would be appreciated, and not making it available would be unwise. The black coat was tailored in a way that went beyond expensive into the category of deliberately understated, which was its own kind of message. Dark hair, slightly damp from the rain outside. A jaw that looked like it hadn't softened since adolescence. Eyes that swept the arrivals hall with the quiet efficiency of a man who categorized every person in a room within the first 5 seconds and filed them accordingly. He was not late 40s. He did not have gray hair. He was not wearing a blue tie. He also was not looking at anyone else's sign. He was looking at hers. Something about the directness of it made Serena's grip tighten on the cardboard. She kept her face neutral, the way she did when she was behind a camera and didn't want to distract her subject. The man walked toward her with the measured pace of someone who did not rush for anything, stopped 2 feet in front of her, and looked down at the sign. "Hargrove?" he said. His voice was low, slightly accented. European something, smoothed down by years of American living until only the edges remained. "That's for me." Serena looked at him, then at the sign, then back at him. The description Camilla had given her was so completely wrong that she experienced a brief, irrational moment of wondering if she'd misspelled it. She had not misspelled it. The name on the cardboard was very clearly Hargrove, and the man standing in front of her was very clearly not someone who could be described with the words gray hair or blue tie. "I'm sorry," she said. You're Hargrove?" Something moved through his eyes. It was there and gone before she could name it. "Yes," he said simply. "The company sent me," she said. "Meridian Associates. My sister, the assistant coordinator, couldn't make it tonight. I'm covering." "I see." He said it without any inflection whatsoever. The way you said something when you already knew every detail of the situation and found the explanation mildly interesting at best. He reached out and picked up the handle of his bag from the floor beside him. A clean, simple motion, no hesitation, and waited. Serena blinked. "The car's in the short-term lot, Lot C, first level. It's a bit of a walk in the rain." "That's fine." She turned and started walking. She could hear him behind her, footsteps even, unhurried. She kept her eyes forward and tried to order her thoughts. The description had been so wrong that a small, persistent voice in the back of her mind was already asking questions she didn't want to look at directly. But Camilla was sick. It was almost 5 in the morning, and the most charitable explanation was always the simplest one. Camilla had given her a bad description, or this man had changed the contact photo Camilla was working from, or there were 2 arrivals tonight and she'd grabbed the right sign and the wrong details. She focused on that. The charitable explanation. She pushed through the terminal doors into the rain. The parking structure was grim in the way that all airport parking structures were grim at night. Concrete and fluorescence and the smell of exhaust and rain-wet asphalt. Their footsteps echoed. Serena moved quickly. She'd always been a fast walker. Her mother used to joke that she walked like she was perpetually late for something important. The man behind her kept pace without effort, his hands in his coat pockets, apparently unbothered by the weather, the hour, or the general bleakness of their surroundings. She unlocked the Honda from 20 feet out. The click and flash of the light seemed, in retrospect, like the exact moment everything could still have been different. If she'd double-checked the name, if she'd asked for ID, if she'd called Camilla back, any one of those things, and the rest of it never happens. She didn't do any of them. She just opened the driver's side door and said, "It's about 40 minutes to the hotel. Maybe 35 if the rain keeps people off the highway." He opened the passenger door and looked at the interior of the Honda. Looked at the coffee stain on the seat. Looked at the camera bag in the footwell and the stack of photography books on the back seat and the rosemary air freshener hanging from the rear view that had long since lost any detectable scent of rosemary. He looked at all of this with the expression of a man experiencing something genuinely new. Then he got in. The car was small. The Honda had never seemed small to Serena before, but it did now. It shrank around this man like a jacket that was 2 sizes wrong. He sat with his bag on his knees, which was where it had to go because there was no room for it anywhere else. His shoulder was 4 inches from hers. He smelled like something expensive and clean, cedar and something darker beneath it. And Serena made a conscious decision not to notice that and immediately noticed it more. She started the car. The heater kicked on, coughed once, and then ran. "Hotel Ashford," she said, "on the Meridian account?" "Yes." She pulled out of the space. In the rear-view mirror, nothing. Ahead, the exit ramp and the wet black highway. She merged onto the on-ramp and accelerated carefully. The rain made the road slick, and the Honda's tires weren't as young as they used to be. Silence filled the car. Serena was not someone who needed to fill silence. She'd spent most of her professional life in quiet spaces. Empty buildings, pre-dawn city streets, abandoned architecture. All the places that were most themselves when no one else was present. She understood silence and respected it. But this particular silence had a quality she couldn't quite categorize. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't hostile. It was attentive somehow, like being observed. She glanced at the rearview mirror out of habit. He was looking out the passenger window, profile only. In the half-dark of the passing highway lights, the cut of his jaw and the straight line of his nose made him look like something out of a painting from a period when people painted men to look like warnings. "First time in the city?" she asked. She didn't know why she asked. Professional autopilot, maybe. "No," he said. "Long flight?" 7 hours. "From London?" A pause. Fractional. "Yes." "Heathrow or Gatwick?" He turned his head slightly. The movement was small, but it carried a quality she could only describe as noticing her more carefully. "Heathrow." "Business or—" She stopped herself. "Sorry, I'm not actually a driver. I'm doing this as a favor. I ask a lot of questions when I don't know what else to do." Another pause. Then, "What do you do?" "Photographer, architectural mostly. Buildings. I don't do portraits." "Why not?" It was the first question he'd asked that wasn't answering one of hers. Something about that made her hands adjust slightly on the wheel. "People lie," she said. "Buildings don't. A building looks exactly like what it is when you photograph it. People perform." The highway opened up ahead of them, empty and wet and gray, the city skyline just beginning to materialize in the near distance. Dark towers against a sky that was shifting from black to the particular bruised purple that came right before dawn. "Interesting theory," he said. "Is it wrong?" "It depends on who built the building," he said, "and why." Serena had no immediate answer for that. She filed it in the part of her brain that operated slightly behind real time, the part that kept running even when the rest of her moved on, and focused on the road. She took the Alderman Street exit because it was faster than staying on the highway with construction at the junction, and because she knew this part of the city the way she knew her own apartment, not just the routes, but the reasons behind them, the history stitched into each block. The architecture photographer's curse. She could not drive through any part of this city without cataloging what was there. "This neighborhood is Lenox Hill," she said without quite deciding to. The buildings on the east side of this block were put up in the late 20s. You can tell by the decorative stonework on the upper floors. They were still doing that then, before everything went functional. The one with the green copper oxidation on the corner was a textile warehouse. It's condos now, obviously, but the bones are original. She glanced over. He was looking at the buildings. Actually looking at them not in the glazed way people looked at things they weren't seeing, but with genuine, focused attention. "The one with the arched windows," he said. "What was that?" "Which, the red brick?" "That was a printing house, regional newspaper, early 20th century. They stopped publishing in the 40s. The presses are still in the basement, supposedly. Nobody's ever opened it up properly." "You've tried?" "I've stood outside it with a camera at 6 in the morning trying to get the light right on those windows for 3 different shoots. The current owner won't grant access. I've asked twice." She paused. Very politely, both times. Something shifted in the air in the car, not dramatic. Nothing she could point to. But the quality of the silence changed, like a pressure adjustment. When she glanced over again, she found him looking at her instead of the building. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. But there was something in the single word, a very slight undercurrent of she didn't know. Amusement, maybe. Like she'd said something that surprised him, and he wasn't going to admit to being surprised. They drove in silence for another minute. The rain was easing into a fine mist. The city was beginning its slow morning rearrangement, the first delivery trucks appearing, the traffic lights clicking through their cycles for no one. "There's an all-night cafe 2 blocks from the hotel," Serena said. "If you want coffee before check-in, they do a decent espresso. The owner is Greek and he roasts his own beans in a machine that takes up most of the kitchen and sounds like a small aircraft taking off, which he will absolutely tell you about in detail, whether you ask or not." The man was quiet for a moment. "Is that a recommendation?" he asked. "It's information," she said. "What you do with it is your business." Another pause. Longer. "Stop there," he said. The cafe was called Constantine's, and it sat between a dry cleaner and a building with boarded windows in a block that hadn't decided yet whether it was being gentrified or abandoned. At 5 in the morning, it was lit up like a vigil candle against the surrounding dark, warm, orange light spilling through the window onto the wet pavement. Serena almost didn't go in. She was supposed to deliver him to the hotel and go home and sleep for 3 hours before her 11 o'clock shoot. That was the plan. She went in anyway. Constantine himself was behind the counter, which meant it was before 6, and therefore before his son took over. He was a large man with a white mustache and the permanently pleased expression of someone who had found his purpose in life and never doubted it. He greeted Serena by name and began making her usual without being asked. He looked at the man who'd come in with her with the frank, unhurried assessment of someone who had been reading customers for 40 years. "Friend?" he said to Serena. "Professional acquaintance," she said. Constantine looked at the man again. "Espresso?" "Please," the man said. They sat at the small table by the window. The table had a wobble that Serena knew about and corrected by putting a folded receipt under the short leg without thinking. The man watched her do this with the same quality of attention he'd given the buildings. The coffees came. Serena wrapped both hands around hers because the cafe was warm, but she'd been cold since the parking garage and hadn't quite shaken it. "Your sister," the man said. "The one who asked you to do this. She works for Meridian, junior executive assistant. She's been there about 8 months." Serena looked at her cup. "She takes it very seriously. Maybe too seriously. She was sick tonight, actually sick, running a temperature, and she still called me at 4 in the morning because she was worried about missing a pickup." "She's afraid of making a mistake," the man said. It wasn't a question. "She's afraid of her boss." Serena said it without thinking and then wondered why she'd said it to a stranger. She looked up. "Sorry, that's oversharing." "Not really," he said. "I don't know you." "No," he agreed. "I don't even know if you're the right—" She stopped. Something happened to his face. Not much. The smallest adjustment, somewhere around the eyes. And Serena felt the thought she'd been successfully not having complete itself with sudden, cold clarity. She had picked him up from Terminal C at 5 in the morning. She had a sign with a name. He had looked at the sign and said, "Yes, that's for me." He had not shown her anything. She had not asked for anything. She had driven him across the city in her personal car, told him her sister's name, her employer's name, the fact that her sister was afraid, and was now sitting in a cafe over espresso at 5 in the morning discussing her family's anxieties with a man whose name she only had because he'd claimed a cardboard sign in an airport. The description Camilla gave her: late 40s, gray hair, blue tie. The man across the table: none of those things. "You're not Hargrove," she said. It came out flat, not panicked. She was aware of her own voice with curious detachment, the way you heard yourself in a recording, slightly foreign, slightly too calm. The man set his espresso cup down. "No," he said. The single syllable sat between them. Serena held very still. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past the window, headlights sweeping briefly across the interior of the cafe, and then it was just the quiet again, and the sound of Constantine moving something in the kitchen, and the rain having stopped without her noticing. "Then why did you—" "You had a sign," he said. "I didn't correct you." His voice was the same, measured, unhurried, carrying some quality of finality. "I apologize for that." "You apologize for that," she repeated. "You let a stranger drive you across the city under false pretenses, and you apologize for that." Yes, she should have been more frightened. She noted this in a distant, observational way. A stranger, an airport, before dawn. A man who was, she now understood, very deliberately not the kind of person you looked at directly and forgot. A man whose ease in the car, in the cafe, in the city, that ease wasn't relaxation. It was mastery. The difference between those two things, she was only now understanding, was significant. "Who are you?" she asked. He looked at her. A long moment, during which Serena had the particular sensation of being assessed, not the way she was used to being assessed, the mild objectification or the professional level evaluation of someone determining her usefulness. This was something more thorough, like he was reading something in her that she hadn't known was legible. "My name is Luca De Luca," he said. The name landed with the weight she didn't immediately understand. Then, slowly, she did. Not because she knew it personally. She didn't move in circles where people use that name, but she'd heard it. You heard it in this city the same way you heard weather warnings, in the background, attached to things that happened in parts of town she didn't photograph, associated with names and news articles that went vague at the crucial moments, in the careful way people didn't quite answer questions when certain subjects came up. She heard herself say very quietly, "Oh, oh," he agreed. "I drove you from the airport." "Yes." "In my Honda." The corner of his mouth moved. It was the first time anything in his face had done something that could be called an involuntary response to anything. "Yes," he said. "You did." Serena looked at the table, at her coffee, at the folded receipt under the table leg, the small, ordinary materials of a normal life, all suddenly very vivid against a background that had shifted in ways she couldn't yet quantify. "You should have told me," she said. "Probably," he said. "Why didn't you?" The question came out more honestly than she meant it to. No aggression, no performance of composure, just the actual question sitting there. Luca De Luca picked up his espresso again and looked at it for a moment. "You didn't look at me the way people usually do," he said. He didn't elaborate on what that meant. He didn't seem to feel he needed to. Serena should have pushed back, should have stood up, told him to get his own cab to the hotel, and gone home and called Camilla and figured out what the actual Hargrove situation was and dealt with it in the morning like a rational person. She sat there. "What do you want?" she asked. "Being here, in the city. If you're not on a company visit, I have business," he said. "Different business." He paused. "Your sister's company. How much do you know about what they do?" "Consulting," Serena said. "International something, finance adjacent. I don't really—" She stopped. "Why?" Luca set down the cup. He looked at her with the full weight of those eyes and said nothing for a moment that stretched long enough to feel like a sentence. "I'll tell you," he said slowly, "but not here and not now. There are things you need to understand before you hear what I'm going to tell you, and most of them can't be said in a cafe. That's a very ominous way to order a second coffee. I'm not ordering a second coffee." I noticed. He looked at her again with that fractional almost something in his expression. "You're not afraid," he said. It came out with a quality she couldn't name. Not admiration exactly, not surprise exactly, something that lived between those two things. "I'm terrified," Serena said. "I'm just better at hiding it than most people." The corner of his mouth moved again, and this time it went further. Not quite a smile, but close enough that it changed his face in a way she hadn't expected and couldn't look away from fast enough. "I know," he said. "That's what I mean." The Hotel Ashford was 12 minutes away. Serena drove because she didn't know what else to do with herself, and forward motion felt necessary, the way it always did when she was processing something too large to sit still with. The city outside the windows was beginning to pale, 5:45, and the sky was doing its first tentative experiments with color, gray dissolving into something closer to the blue end of darkness. Buildings emerged from the murk with increasing definition. The street cleaners were out. A man walked a dog who didn't want to be walked at this hour and was communicating this through passive structural resistance. Luca sat in the passenger seat and did not speak. He looked at the city. She had the strong impression he was thinking very precisely about something, and that whatever it was not small. She pulled up to the hotel entrance and stopped. The doorman appeared immediately with an umbrella, moving toward the passenger door before she'd even cut the engine. He looked at the car, at the Honda, at the coffee stain, at the camera bag, with a studied blankness that was its own form of judgment. "My card," Luca said. He held it out. Business card, heavy stock, matte black, only a name and a number. "When you're ready to hear the rest of it." Serena looked at the card, at the number, at the name in clean, restrained font, Luca De Luca. "I haven't decided I want to hear the rest of it," she said. I know, he said. He left the card on the console between them. Think about your sister. He got out of the car. The doorman materialized the umbrella over him instantly, as if he'd been expecting exactly this man, at exactly this hour, and had been quietly ready. They moved into the hotel without Luca looking back. Serena sat in the idling car and stared at the card. Think about your sister. She picked it up. The stock was heavy, and the printing was precise, and her thumb moved over the embossed letters of his name the way her fingers moved over architectural details when she was trying to understand a structure through touch rather than sight. Her phone buzzed. Camilla, did he get there okay? Was Hargrove nice? I'm so sorry I had to ask you to do this. I owe you so much. Serena stared at the message, looked at the hotel entrance, now empty, looked at the card in her hand. She started typing. He got there, but there's something I need to tell. She stopped, deleted it, stared at the phone. The Hargrove she'd been sent to pick up, the real one, the gray-haired corporate one, was still somewhere in that airport, presumably, waiting for a driver who was never going to arrive. And somewhere inside that hotel, a man whose name she'd heard like a weather warning was preparing for what he'd called different business. And before he'd gotten out of her car, he'd told her to think about her sister. Not think about your safety. Not think about yourself. Your sister. Serena put the car in drive. She drove 3 blocks and pulled over and sat with the engine running and the heat on and the early city going about its 5:55 business around her. And she thought about Camilla, about the fear in her voice at 4 in the morning, about the way she'd said he notices everything. About 8 months at a company Serena had never bothered to learn the details of because it paid well and Camilla was happy and some questions were easier not to ask. She opened her hand. The card was still in it. She put it in her jacket pocket and made herself drive home. But she didn't sleep. She sat on her apartment floor with her back against the couch and her camera in her lap and Luca DeLuca's card on the coffee table in front of her. And she thought about her sister. And she thought about what it meant that a man she'd recognized like a warning had gotten into her beat-up Honda at an airport before sunrise and said nothing to correct her mistake. And she thought about what kind of person let a stranger drive them across a city in the dark just to see what she would do. And she thought about what kind of person she was. By the time gray light came through the windows, she had her answer. And she knew she was going to call the number. That she just didn't know yet what that call was going to cost her. The call happened at 9:17 in the morning. Serena had been awake for 5 hours. She'd made coffee twice and drunk neither cup. She'd opened her editing software, stared at a folder of unprocessed images from a shoot 3 days ago, closed it. She'd walked to the window 4 times and looked at the street below. The dry cleaner opening its gate, a woman arguing quietly with someone on her phone, pigeons reorganizing themselves on the fire escape across the alley with the serious deliberation of people rearranging furniture. And then walked back to the coffee table and looked at the card. On the 5th time at the window, she picked up her phone and dialed. It rang twice. "You're earlier than I expected," Luca said. "I haven't slept," Serena said. "What did you mean about my sister?" A pause. Brief. "Not on the phone. I'm not meeting you somewhere because a stranger told me to think about my family in a cryptic voice outside a hotel at 6 in the morning. That's a reasonable position. It's the only position I have. Talk or don't. I'm hanging up in 30 seconds. Another pause. Longer. She could hear nothing. Total background silence, which told her he was in a room with very good soundproofing or very little in it. "Meridian Associates," he said finally. "Do you know who they do business with?" "International consulting. Finance. My sister said..." "Your sister told you what she was told to tell people. What do you know about the man who runs it? Vincent Moretti." Serena's hand tightened on the phone. "I know Camilla mentioned the name once. I know she didn't look comfortable when she said it. There's a reason for that." "Tell me the reason." "In person," he said. "Neutral location. Your choice. Bring whoever you want. I'll come alone." She almost said no. She was standing in her apartment in yesterday's jeans with cold coffee behind her and a cardboard sign in the recycling bin, and she almost said no because every reasonable faculty she possessed was pointing in the direction of no. Instead, she heard herself say, "Constantine's, 1 hour." She hung up before he could answer. Then she called Camilla. The phone rang 6 times and went to voicemail. Serena stood in the middle of her apartment and listened to her sister's recorded voice with the focused attention of someone trying to detect something wrong in a sound they'd heard 1,000 times. Nothing specific, just the voice. Just Camilla at her most professional, clipped and polished in the way she'd never been before this job. She left no message. She changed her shirt, drank half the cold coffee because her body needed the caffeine regardless of quality, and grabbed her camera bag out of pure muscle memory. She always had the camera. It was the one constant she had left. She was out the door in 11 minutes. Constantine's at 9:30 was a different creature than Constantine's at 5 in the morning. The booths were half full. Someone had turned on the small television mounted in the corner, muted, cycling through morning news. The smell of fresh bread had joined the coffee, and Constantine's son Petros was behind the counter in his father's place, moving with the efficient, slightly resentful competence of a man who would rather be somewhere else, but had long ago understood he wouldn't be. Serena took the back booth. Not the window table, but the window table was where she'd sat with Luca before sunrise, and she had a superstitious relationship with repeating things that had already gone wrong once. The back booth had a wall behind her, and a clear sightline to the door, which she'd always preferred even before today. Luca arrived exactly at 10:30. He was dressed differently. Dark trousers, a gray sweater that looked like it cost more than her camera lens, the same coat from the airport. No tie. He moved through the cafe the same way he'd moved through the terminal, with that quality of controlled displacement, the world adjusting around him rather than the other way around. Two men she hadn't noticed until this moment shifted in their seats near the door as he came in, not standing, not moving, just the micro-adjustment of people keeping their peripheral vision current. She filed this immediately. He wasn't alone, technically. He'd just left his company at the door. He slid into the opposite side of the booth and looked at her with the same direct, reading attention from the night before. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I told you that on the phone. You look worse in person." "Thank you. Start talking." Petros appeared at the table. Luca ordered black coffee without looking at the menu, which he couldn't have read anyway because it was written on a chalkboard across the room in Petros's handwriting, which had never been legible at any distance. Serena realized he'd simply ordered the only thing he ever ordered. When Petros left, Luca set both hands flat on the table. It was the first deliberately open gesture she'd seen from him, and something about it felt like a concession. "Vincent Moretti," he said. "What I'm going to tell you is not something you can unknow. I don't like preambles. Just say it." His jaw moved slightly. Meridian Associates has been operating as a financial front for close to 4 years. The consulting work is real. It covers the surface. Underneath it, Moretti has been running money through the firm's international accounts. Client transactions, investment portfolios, fee structures, all of it designed to absorb and clean large sums from several sources. He paused. The sources include arms procurement deals, extortion networks, and at least 2 trafficking operations that federal investigators have been building a case around for the past 18 months. Serena sat with this for a moment. The cafe continued its morning business around them. Someone's cup clinked against a saucer. The television showed traffic on a highway she recognized. "You're telling me my sister has been working inside a money laundering operation for 8 months, she said. "She wouldn't know it," he said. "People at Camilla's level don't see the architecture. They see legitimate client work, normal transactions, a demanding boss who pays well and doesn't explain himself. They don't know what the money is before it gets to them." But she could be held liable. If the federal case breaks open the way it's building, yes. Employees at every level become persons of interest. The investigation doesn't distinguish between knowing participation and useful ignorance. Your sister's name is on communications, transaction records, client correspondence. She processed some of it herself without knowing what it was. Serena's coffee arrived. She didn't touch it. "How do you know all of this?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement with an implied answer. "Because Vincent Moretti borrowed infrastructure from an organization I control," Luca said, "without authorization. And when I found out 18 months ago, I began paying very close attention to everything he was doing with it." He said it the same way he said everything, even quiet, with the particular weight of someone who had decided a long time ago not to use volume for emphasis, because they didn't need to. He's been operating inside a network that doesn't belong to him. using connections he was permitted to use for specific purposes, and expanded beyond any agreement. He has been stealing from people who will eventually notice and respond. I intend to make sure I'm the one who ends this before that happens. So you're not doing this because of my sister? No. You're doing this because he crossed you? Yes. She appreciated that he didn't pretend otherwise. She'd been watching for the moment when he'd reach for something sympathetic to dress it in, and he hadn't. He'd just said yes. Then why tell me at all, she said. Why not do whatever you're going to do and leave my sister to take her chances with the federal case? Because I need something from inside Meridian's system, he said. And the fastest path into their records is someone with existing access credentials. There it was. Serena felt the shape of it settle. The airport. The wrong sign. The coffee at Constantine's before sunrise. The card left on her console. Think about your sister. All of it moving in a single direction she'd been aware of without letting herself see it clearly until now. You want to use Camilla's access, she said, not Camilla. She can't know about this. If she knew and Moretti suspected, she has no protection, no training in hiding it. She'd panic. He'd see it. So you want to use me. You're not in Moretti's system. You're unknown to him. You have access to Camilla's credentials through your relationship with her. You're technically capable. I've looked at your work, your process. You manage your own systems, digital archives, client databases. You understand how records look when they're real. You looked at my work. Yes. When? Last night. After the hotel. A fraction of a pause. You're very good. Don't compliment my photography while asking me to help you run an operation against a crime syndicate. Fair, he said. He didn't seem bothered by the pushback. He seemed, she thought, almost accustomed to it in a way that felt newer than old. She pushed her coffee aside. And if I say no, then I pursue other options. The federal case builds on its own timeline. Moretti likely gets ahead of it. He has connections in the investigative chain. The prosecution stalls. In the meantime, anyone with documented involvement in the firm's operations is exposed. Your sister goes to a deposition and is asked to explain transactions she processed without understanding them, without a lawyer who knows what they're dealing with, without any framework for what the actual scope of it is. And if I say yes, I give Camilla protection. Her records get quietly reorganized, not destroyed, restructured in a way that clarifies her role as administrative rather than operational. The federal case still concludes. Moretti goes down. Your sister keeps her life. Serena was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Petros came back and refreshed their coffees without being asked and left again. Long enough that one of the men near the door shifted position slightly, a subtle recalibration. I need to think, she said. Of course. Don't say of course like that. Don't say it like you already know the answer. His eyes met hers directly. For a moment she had the full force of whatever it was he was, the thing underneath the measured voice and the controlled posture and the expensive sweater, the thing she'd been half aware of since the airport. It was not comfortable to look at directly. It was like looking at something structural, load-bearing, built to hold up a great deal of weight for a very long time. I don't know the answer, he said. I know what kind of person you are. I don't know what you'll decide. She left before he finished his coffee. She called Camilla 4 more times between 11 and noon. On the 4th call, her sister answered, and Serena could hear immediately that the fever hadn't broken. Camilla's voice had the particular thick quality of someone breathing through congestion, vowels going soft at the edges, words requiring slightly more effort than they should. I'm fine, Camilla said, which was what she always said. You're not fine, you're sick. I took medicine. I needed to check in about the Hargrove pickup. Did everything go okay? He didn't complain. The Hargrove pickup was fine. Serena pressed her back against her apartment wall and stared at the ceiling. Cam, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me. Okay. Caution moved through the single word. The particular caution of someone who had been editing themselves for a while. Your boss, Moretti, is everything okay at work? Not the surface stuff. Actually okay. A silence. What do you mean? Camilla said. I mean, are there things at Meridian that seem off? Transactions that don't have clear explanations. Client work that you process but can't quite follow the logic of. Instructions that don't get written down. Longer silence. Serena, why are you asking me this? Answer the question. I can't. It's not. Camilla stopped. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, and the fever thickness was still there, but something else was in it now too, something tightly controlled. There are things I don't ask about. That's not unusual in this industry. There are always, Camilla, I need this job. 3 words, very flat, like 3 bricks being placed. I needed the job, and I got it, and it pays what it pays, and I don't ask certain questions because certain questions aren't part of my job description. That's how it works. That's how lots of jobs work. Serena pressed her eyes shut. I know. So don't do whatever it sounds like you're about to do. Don't make this into something. I'm not making it into anything. I'm asking because I'm worried about you. Then stop worrying. I'm fine. I'm sick. And I'm fine. And I'm going back to sleep. A pause. Thank you for this morning. I'll make it up to you. Camilla hung up. Serena stood in her apartment with the dead phone at her ear and thought about her sister's voice on that call. The flatness of, I need this job. Not defensiveness. Not the dismissal of someone who genuinely didn't know what Serena was approaching. The flatness of someone keeping a lid on something with both hands and very deliberately not looking at what was underneath it. She knew. Maybe not the scope of it. Maybe not the specifics. But some part of Camilla had been working alongside things that didn't add up for 8 months and had made a decision not to add them up. Not out of corruption, out of survival. That was different from guilt. But a federal investigator working from the outside in might not see the difference. Serena put her phone down on the counter and went to her desk and opened her laptop. She looked up Vincent Moretti. She spent 2 hours pulling everything that existed publicly, business profiles, industry articles, 2 mentions in financial trade publications, a brief appearance in a city council gala photograph from 18 months ago. He looked exactly like what he was pretending to be. 61, silver-haired, groomed to a precision that telegraphed old money, regardless of where the money actually came from. The kind of face that appeared on boards and committees and event programs. The kind of face nobody looked behind. She found 3 separate profiles listing Meridian Associates. Different tones. 1 was glowing, 2 were neutral. All of them said the same things: international consulting, financial services, cross-border investment advisory. All of them had no details that meant anything. She found 1 article from 14 months ago, a financial crimes journalist writing a piece about offshore account structures. Meridian appeared in a single paragraph, named alongside several other firms as part of a broader network worth examining. The journalist had been careful with language, nothing stated directly, everything framed as questions worth asking. The article had 200 readers, according to the engagement metrics. Serena stared at that paragraph for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Luca's number. I have conditions, she said. She heard the quality of his silence shift. Tell me. I do this my way. I'm not using your surveillance equipment. I'm not carrying anything you give me into that building. Whatever I find through what's already accessible through Camilla's credentials, and I document it with my own camera. Physical photographs. My hands, my decisions, my methods. If it's not enough, that's the answer you get. That's slower. It's also not something I'd be ashamed of explaining later. Those are my conditions. Yes or no. A pause. Yes. And Camilla's records. You do that before I go anywhere near that building. Not after. Not contingent on results. Before. That's a significant ask. It's the only ask. Protect her first. Then I help you. Non-negotiable. The silence was longer this time. She was aware of her own heartbeat in it, the particular loud quality of a pulse when you were holding a position you were terrified of holding. Done, he said. 48 hours. The records will be restructured before you enter the building. How do I know you've actually done it? You don't, he said. You trust me or you don't proceed. Tremendous sales pitch. I'm aware. She exhaled through her nose. Okay, she said. When? 2 days. Moretti has a meeting with several of my people on Thursday morning at Meridian's headquarters. It's a scheduled business review. He won't be expecting anything beyond the standard tension that comes with that kind of meeting. While the meeting runs, you go in through the executive assistant entrance with Camilla's credentials and access the financial operations floor. I don't know the layout. You'll have it. And if someone recognizes that I'm not Camilla, you've been to the office before? Once, for a holiday event, 18 months ago. Then the staff has turnover on your side. Junior executives cycle quickly in those environments. You carry yourself like you belong there, you have access credentials, and you're in and out in under 40 minutes. Easy for you to say. I'll be in the building, he said, in the conference room with Moretti. If anything goes wrong, you call me and I pull you out. You'll be sitting across the table from the man we're trying to destroy. Yes. While I'm in his filing system. Yes. Serena closed her laptop. Her hands were steady. She noted this with distant interest. She'd expected them to shake. You do this a lot? Use civilians? No, he said. And then after a moment, I don't usually trust anyone outside my organization with anything that matters. She didn't ask why this was different. She was starting to understand that with Luca DeLuca, asking the direct question got you the careful answer, and understanding the actual answer required watching what he did rather than what he said. 2 days, she said. Send me the floor plan. She hung up. She sat at her desk in the afternoon light and looked at the city through her window. The buildings she knew by their bones, the streets she'd walked with a camera at every possible hour, the ordinary visible surface of a place that had underneath it, apparently, a whole architecture she'd never thought to photograph. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, a file transfer notification. She opened it. The floor plan of Meridian Associates, 14th floor. Detailed, accurate, not a building schematic, a real operational map, the kind someone who had been inside recently had drawn from memory, or better. At the bottom of the file, a single line of text. The records are already done. I moved faster than I said I would. Serena looked at the message, read it twice, then set the phone down and pressed both palms flat on the desk and breathed with the careful deliberateness of someone who needed to stay functional. He'd done it already, before she'd fully said yes, before the terms were settled, which meant either he'd been certain she would agree, which was its own uncomfortable thought, or he'd done it regardless of whether she agreed, which meant Camilla's protection hadn't actually been contingent on Serena's cooperation at all. He'd protected Camilla anyway. She sat with that for a long time, with what it meant and what it cost him, and what it said about a man she had every rational reason to distrust completely. The floor plan sat open on her screen. 14 floors, 2 elevator banks, 1 service corridor running along the north wall. The financial operations office was marked in a quiet, precise notation in the northeast corner, 3rd door past the server room. She knew what the building looked like from the outside. She'd photographed it 3 years ago for an urban architecture series. She'd noticed the facade, the window proportions, the way the glass caught the late afternoon light and turned it blue. She'd stood on the sidewalk across the street with her camera and shot it for 20 minutes and never wondered what went on inside. She wondered now. She pulled up the photographs. There they were, the building clean and geometric against a pale sky, its surface honest in the way she'd told Luca buildings were, saying exactly what it was, except it hadn't been. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she began to study the floor plan. That night she made a mistake. She went to see Camilla. She told herself it was just to check on her. That's what she repeated to herself on the drive over, that it was nothing to do with what she knew and everything to do with the fact that her sister was sick and alone in a 3rd floor walk-up with nobody to bring her soup. Pure motive. No agenda. Camilla answered the door in a sweatshirt, clearly still feverish, clearly exhausted, and clearly surprised. What are you doing here? Brought you soup. Actual soup, not canned. Serena held up the container. From the Vietnamese place on Clement. Camilla stared at her for a moment and then stepped aside. The apartment was warm and slightly dim, the particular environment of someone who had been sick in bed all day and let the light go without noticing. There were used tissues on the coffee table, a half-watched episode of something paused on the laptop screen, an untouched glass of water, and the specific visual detritus of someone unable to take care of themselves properly. Serena set the soup on the kitchen table and found bowls. They sat. Camilla ate because she needed to and said very little. Serena watched her sister's hands around the bowl and thought about the floor plan in her phone and said nothing. "You're being quiet," Camilla said. "You're sick. I didn't want to talk at you." "You always talk at me." Camilla looked up. She had her mother's eyes, darker than Serena's, more triaged, the kind of eyes that tended to know things before they were said. "What is it?" "Nothing." Serena. Serena looked at her bowl. "I'm just worried about you. Working for someone you're afraid of. That's not— I told you not to. I know what you told me." "Then why?" "Because I'm your sister. I get to worry." She looked up. "I get to think that you deserve better than a job that has you calling me at 4 in the morning, terrified of making a small mistake. That's not a job. That's something else." Camilla set her spoon down. In the quiet of the apartment, in the soft, dim light, she looked suddenly younger and more tired than Serena had seen her in a long time. Like the maintained surface of her, the professional posture, the careful voice, had used up more energy than she had left today. "I know," she said quietly. "I know it's not— I know there are things I don't look at directly. I'm not stupid, Serena. I know you're not, but I'm close to a promotion. If I can just get to the next level, I have more control, more visibility into what's actually happening. I can make better decisions from there." Serena looked at her sister's face, at the fever brightness in her eyes and the hope still sitting there, fragile and functional, doing its job. She thought about what Luca had told her, about the federal case, about the timeline. She thought about what she knew and what she couldn't say. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I hear you." She stayed another hour. She washed the bowls and made sure Camilla took her medication and called her a cab because Camilla's car was in the shop. She hugged her sister at the door, and Camilla said thank you in the way she'd said it since they were children, low and real, without performance. And Serena stood in the hallway after the door closed and stared at the peeling paint on the wall and felt very precisely the weight of what she was carrying. She was going to walk into Meridian Associates in 2 days. She was going to do it for her sister, who didn't know she was doing it and couldn't know. She was going to do it because a crime lord had gotten into her car on a rainy Tuesday morning and told her a truth she couldn't unknow. And because the only protection available to the person she loved most in the world came from the most dangerous man she'd ever met. She took the stairs, walked to her car, sat in it with her hands on the wheel. Her phone buzzed. Luca. Thursday, 8 a.m. Dress like you belong. I'll see you inside. Serena read the message, put the phone in her pocket, started the car. There was no version of herself that didn't walk through those doors on Thursday. She'd understood that, she realized, since the moment she'd sat in Constantine's and looked at the floor plan on her screen. Probably since the moment she'd picked up his card from the console and put it in her pocket instead of leaving it in the car. She pulled into traffic and drove home in the dark, and all around her the city moved through its night without knowing what was coming, and somewhere on one of the upper floors of a hotel, a man she'd carried through its streets before sunrise was already 3 steps ahead of Thursday, already seeing the shape of what was about to happen with the cold, precise vision of someone who had been playing this game since before she'd known it existed. And for the first time since the airport, Serena Vale was afraid. Not of Luca de Luca, of herself, of what she was willing to do, of how little she'd hesitated when it actually came to it. The city light swam in her windshield as she drove, and the card was still in her jacket pocket, and Thursday was 36 hours away, and Thursday came in cold and gray, the kind of morning that didn't bother pretending to be anything else. Serena was awake at 5:40, not because an alarm went off. She'd set one for 6:15 and then lain in the dark for 30 minutes, watching the ceiling do nothing, her body already running on a different clock than the one on her phone. The apartment was very quiet. She could hear the building's heat cycling through the pipes, that metallic ticking language old radiators spoke all winter, and the distant punctuation of a bus on the street below making its first pass of the day. She got up, showered with the water hotter than comfortable because she needed to feel awake in her skin and not just in her head. Stood in front of her closet for 4 minutes. Camilla's work environment, business formal, conservative palette, the particular aesthetic of an office that wanted to look like old money. Serena owned precisely none of this. What she owned were dark jeans, photography site practical jackets, and one blazer she'd bought for a gallery opening 2 years ago that still had a film canister in the left pocket. She pulled out the blazer. Dark navy, structured. With black trousers, it looked like intent rather than accident. She put her hair up the way Camilla wore hers, pulled back, controlled, the kind of style that said, "I am here to work and not to be noticed." She stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at the result. She looked like someone trying to look like someone else. That would have to be enough. Her camera bag was wrong. Too obviously professional, too textured with use. She transferred what she needed into a plain black shoulder bag. Her compact camera, 2 spare memory cards, a slim portable drive, and the photographed copy of Meridian's floor plan she'd printed and memorized, and then burned in her kitchen sink the night before, because she'd learned the layout well enough that the paper version was only a liability now. She added a notepad, a pen, a phone charger that looked ordinary and was ordinary. Nothing that couldn't be explained, nothing that looked like evidence of intent. She locked the apartment at 7:12. Outside, the city was doing its early morning rotation. She walked 3 blocks to the coffee cart on Alderman because standing still in her apartment had become intolerable, and she needed something to do with her hands. The man at the cart recognized her by her order and had it ready before she finished opening her wallet. She stood on the sidewalk with the cup and looked at the building 2 blocks north where she'd photographed the facade 3 years ago, and thought about how completely different it was to look at a building when you knew what was inside it. At 7:40, she texted Luca. En route. The response came in 40 seconds. Confirmed. I'm already inside. She thought about that. Luca de Luca already inside that building, already sitting across a table from Vincent Moretti, already running the particular cold performance of a man who could look directly at his enemy and show him nothing. She tried to imagine what that felt like and found she couldn't locate the right frame for it. It was too far outside anything she'd done. She started walking. Meridian Associates occupied floors 12 through 15 of a building on Harwick Street that looked exactly like what it was pretending to be. A serious, mid-century professional tower with updated glass and a lobby that smelled like recirculated air and quiet money. The kind of building that had a security desk staffed by 2 men who had never in their working lives been required to do anything more than check IDs and direct visitors to the elevator bank. Serena pushed through the revolving door at 7:58. The lobby was moving, not crowded, but populated with the purposeful foot traffic of a workday beginning. People in coats crossing toward elevators, 2 women in conversation near the coffee kiosk, a man on his phone pacing a tight rectangle near the window. Nobody looked at her. She was conscious of this in a very specific way, the difference between invisibility and unnotability. She wanted to be the second thing. She went to the security desk. The guard on the left looked up with the professional neutrality of someone doing a job that required minimal human engagement. "Name and company," he said. "Camilla Vall, Meridian Associates. I forgot my badge this morning." Serena kept her voice flat and faintly annoyed, the tone of someone inconvenienced by their own mistake. She slid the temporary ID Luca had arranged across the desk. It had arrived at her apartment the previous evening via a courier who said nothing, handed her an envelope, and left before she could ask who sent it. The ID was perfect. She didn't ask how. The guard checked it, looked at the screen, looked at the ID, looked back at the screen. Standard procedure, no more than 12 seconds, and then he handed it back. 14th floor, Ms. Vale. Sign the log." She signed Camilla's name. She had practiced the signature enough times the night before that her hand moved through it without hesitation. The elevator doors opened and she stepped in and turned to face the lobby as the doors closed. And in the 1 second before they shut completely, she saw the guard pick up the phone. Standard procedure, she told herself. He calls up to the floor to confirm. That's normal. The elevator moved. Her pulse was somewhere in her throat. 14th floor. The doors opened into a reception area that was everything the building's lobby aspired to be. Clean lines, muted colors, the kind of deliberate, tasteful understatement that worked harder than overt luxury to communicate security and permanence. A young woman at the reception desk looked up. She did not recognize Serena. This was expected. There had been turnover. "Camilla Vale?" she said. "Yes, I have materials to pull for the morning review." "Of course, go ahead," just like that. Serena walked past the reception desk and turned left into the interior corridor, moving with the practiced directional certainty of someone who had done this walk before. She had the floor plan in her memory, left from reception, past the first set of glass offices, right at the printer station, through the door marked Operations with a keypad entry. The code had been in the file Luca sent, a 4-digit sequence changed every 2 weeks, confirmed current as of this morning. She entered the code at the keypad without breaking stride. The door opened. The operations office was what she'd expected from the floor plan. A long rectangular room with 2 rows of workstations, currently occupied by 4 people at the far end, their backs to her. Server racks on the north wall. A row of filing cabinets along the east side. The old-fashioned kind that still existed because certain categories of records were kept in physical format by legal requirement. And at the far end, past the workstations, the door to the financial records archive. A separate room, access restricted to senior operations staff and executive assistants with the right clearance level. Camilla's clearance level covered it. Serena moved to the archive door and used the credentials without pausing. She went inside and closed the door behind her. The archive was small and humming. A dedicated server terminal on one wall, 2 filing cabinet units, a narrow table, and the blue-white light of a screen in sleep mode. She woke the terminal. Entered credentials. Waited 5 seconds that felt considerably longer. Access granted. She exhaled once, carefully, and started working. She was 22 minutes in when she found the first file that made her stop breathing. She'd been moving efficiently. She had a method, the same systematic approach she used when shooting a complex interior, working section by section and not getting distracted by individual details until she had the full scope of the space. Client accounts first. Transaction records. Cross-referencing the account names against the list Luca had provided as reference markers. Names that appeared in offshore registry documentation, names that appeared in the arms procurement intelligence he'd shared. She was photographing everything sequentially, her compact camera steady, the memory card filling with clean, legible images. The file was labeled Internal Restructure, Q3 Admin. Nothing about it looked like anything. It was filed between standard HR documentation and a routine facilities renewal notice. She'd almost skipped it. Something made her open it. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a restructuring memo. Genuinely mundane, personnel review language, nothing. The second was a communication chain. Printed emails, 3 pages, the kind of record that existed in hard copy because someone had been careful about keeping it off the digital system. She read the first email. Then she read it again. The name at the top of the communication chain, the sender, the name authorizing what the emails described, was not Vincent Moretti. It was her sister's direct supervisor, a man named Paul Dern, Senior Operations Director, Camilla's immediate manager for the past 8 months. And the content of the emails described something she hadn't been prepared for, a secondary operation running inside Meridian's own financial structure that Moretti himself didn't authorize or control. A separate channel, a separate set of accounts, money being siphoned out of Moretti's laundering operation before it was fully cleaned, redirected through a second set of blind accounts, routed to a recipient whose name appeared only as a reference code. Paul Dern had been skimming from Vincent Moretti for 11 months, using access and systems that Camilla had helped set up during her first 3 months on the job, because she was good at her work and had been given those responsibilities because she was good at her work, and she had done everything correctly and professionally and had no way of knowing what she was building. Serena photographed every page. Her hands were steady. This was something she understood about herself now, that in the worst moments, the physical part of her held together even when everything else was reorganizing rapidly. She photographed the emails, the account reference codes, the dates, the routing notations in the margins that someone had written in pencil, as if pencil somehow made them less real. She was reaching for the 3rd document when the archive door opened. She turned. Paul Dern was standing in the doorway. He was not tall, medium height, the kind of man who wore his authority in precision rather than size, silver-rimmed glasses, a dark suit that fit like it was issued rather than chosen. He was 53, according to the company profile she'd looked at. He had the face of someone who had been controlling situations for so long that surprise was no longer in his repertoire. He did not look surprised now. He looked at her, at the camera in her hands, at the open filing cabinet, at the terminal screen still showing the records she'd been accessing. "You're not Camilla," he said. It was not a question, and it was not panic. It was a statement delivered with the flat, absorptive quality of a man updating his calculations in real time. Serena did not move. "I'm covering for her," she said. It sounded exactly as inadequate as it was. "Put the camera down," he said. She didn't. He stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind him. The latch caught with a small, definitive sound. He moved to the side and she tracked him instinctively, keeping him in her peripheral vision while keeping the documents in front of her visible. The room was very small. The table was between them. Not enough table. "I know who sent you," he said. "Luca DeLuca doesn't send civilians into an operation like this unless he wants something specific. What did he tell you about what to look for?" "I don't know what you're talking about. That's the wrong choice." He said it quietly. "I've been managing risk in this building for 4 years. I can look at a situation and tell you exactly how many ways it goes wrong. The way this goes wrong for you is if you don't talk to me right now, because the alternative is I call downstairs, the security team pulls the entry log and the elevator footage, and the person whose credentials you used this morning has a very difficult conversation with federal investigators who have been building a case they think is about Moretti." He paused. "It's not only about Moretti." Serena heard the sentence land and felt its shape. "What does that mean?" "It means the case that's been building for 18 months is larger than DeLuca told you. It means there are people inside the federal investigation who work for interests other than the investigation." He moved slightly. Not toward her, a lateral adjustment, the kind of movement that was positioning without appearing to be. "It means your sister's name is already in a file that has nothing to do with Moretti's operation specifically, and restructuring her administrative records doesn't remove it because the file I'm talking about isn't in this building." The cold came from inside her chest and moved outward. "You're lying," she said. "I'm explaining," he said. "There's a difference. I have no interest in your sister. She's useful to me as a functioning employee. What I have an interest in is understanding what you took off that terminal and what you photographed from that cabinet, because if DeLuca has the secondary accounts, he can trace them, and I am not ready for that yet." "Ready for what?" "To be finished here." He said it with a calm that was its own kind of threat. Not the volcanic kind, the tectonic kind, slow and total. "I'm leaving Meridian. I've been planning to leave for 6 months. I needed 11 months of accumulation to make the departure sustainable. I'm at 9. You've just walked into the worst possible 2 months of the worst possible year, and if what you found goes to DeLuca before I'm out, every piece of cover I've built around your sister's involvement in the administrative setup gets pulled with me." Serena looked at him, at the glasses, at the hands folded in front of him, the particular stillness of a man who was managing himself very carefully. "You built coverage around Camila," she said slowly. "I protected her." "Yes. Not out of generosity. She's a competent employee and I needed her functional and unafraid. But the protection is structural. It's tied to my continued presence here. If I'm exposed before I'm out..." He stopped. "The coverage disappears. And Camilla takes the liability for the accounts she helped set up." "That is what I'm telling you, yes." Serena set the camera down on the table, not because he'd told her to, because she needed both hands free and she needed to think and she needed him to believe she was making a concession. "What do you want from me?" "The memory card," he'd said. "And the terminal session. You log out, I pull the access record, you leave the building, and you tell DeLuca you found nothing actionable. He goes after Moretti with whatever else he has. Moretti goes down, the federal case concludes, and your sister walks away with nothing attached to her name. And you walk away with 9 months of stolen money. I walk away with operational security," he said. "What I do with it afterward is not your concern." Serena stood in the narrow archive room with the table between them and the camera on the table and the memory card inside it, holding 47 photographs of documents that could destroy 3 different people's carefully constructed situations, and she thought about Camilla sitting in her apartment last night eating soup with a fever, saying, "I need this job," saying, "I'm close to a promotion," saying, "I'm not stupid, Serena," with all that careful hope still intact. She thought about Luca downstairs in the conference room. She thought about the email chain in the filing cabinet, the secondary accounts, the reference codes, the amount of money that had moved through those accounts over 11 months. She thought about Paul Dern's voice saying the coverage disappears. And she thought about what Luca DeLuca had said to her in Constantine's that first morning. "You don't trust me. You don't proceed. Not you can't proceed. You don't. She picked up the camera. Dern moved, not fast. He didn't need to be fast because the room was 9 feet wide, and the table was the only thing between them, and he'd been managing physical situations for longer than she'd been managing anything. His hand came down on her wrist. Not violent, controlling. The grip of someone who wanted to stop movement, not cause pain. His other hand reached for the camera. She twisted her wrist inward, the way her college self-defense class had taught her in a single session she'd attended once and somehow retained, and pulled back, and the grip broke at the thumb joint, and the camera stayed in her hand, and she was already moving for the door. He caught her by the arm at the door. "Don't," he said, low, right behind her ear. "Don't do this. Let go of me. You don't understand what you're carrying out of this room." "I understand exactly what I'm carrying." She kept her voice level. The door handle was under her other hand. "I understand it's documentation of a crime, and I understand that your coverage of my sister was always contingent on your own safety, and I understand that any arrangement I make with you has the same expiration date that your protection for Camilla does, which is whenever it becomes inconvenient for you." She pressed down on the handle. "So no." His grip tightened. She pulled the door open, and his momentum carried him forward, and she stepped sideways, and he hit the door frame, and she was through the archive doorway and into the operations room, and the 4 people at the workstations all turned at once to look at her, and Paul Dern came through the door behind her, and for one suspended moment, the whole room was very still. Then she was moving. Through the operations room, past the workstations, through the door and into the corridor, and she was walking fast, because running was the thing that made everyone remember your face, and she needed to get to the elevator, or the stairwell, or a signal. She needed Luca. She needed to be out of this building with the card intact, and she needed to do all of this in the next 3 minutes before Dern recovered and made the call he'd threatened to make. She hit the stairwell door and took the stairs down, her hand on the railing, her footsteps bouncing off concrete. 12 flights between her and the lobby, and her shoulder bag tight against her side and the camera inside it, and the memory card inside the camera, and her phone already out of her pocket. She called Luca. It rang. 1 ring, 2. Her feet hit the 11th floor landing. 10. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "I'm in the middle of—" "I need you to leave the meeting," she said. "Right now. There's something wrong. Not Moretti. Someone inside. I have the documentation, but someone found me, and he knows who sent me, and he's going to make a call." Silence. 2 seconds. On the other end, she could hear a chair, a surface sound, the background ambient of a conference room. "Where are you?" he said. His voice had changed. Not louder. Something had been removed from it. Whatever social layer had been running during the meeting, stripped away entirely, leaving something much colder and much more direct underneath. "Stairwell, coming down from 14. Lobby in 90 seconds. Don't stop for anything." He hung up. 8 flights? 6? 4. Her calves were burning, and she was breathing in the controlled pattern of someone trying to stay functional under exertion, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't let the body start panicking before the mind does. 2 flights. She hit the lobby door. The lobby was exactly as she'd left it. The security guard at the desk was on the phone. He looked at her as she came through the stairwell door, and something shifted in his expression. Not alarm, just attention. And she didn't look at him. She looked at the revolving door, and she walked. She was 6 feet from the exit when a hand closed around her upper arm from behind. Not Dern's hand. Different grip, different size. She turned. One of the security team. Not the desk guard. A 3rd man she hadn't registered on entry, standing near the pillar to the left of the elevator bank. Bigger. The hand on her arm was professional and final. "Ms. Vale," he said. "Mr. Dern would like a word." The lobby was still moving around them. People crossing, the coffee kiosk running, the ordinary machinery of a workday not noticing any of this. The desk guard was still on his phone. The revolving door was 8 feet away. "I have an appointment," Serena said. "It'll only take a moment." The grip didn't change. She looked at the door. She looked at the man. She looked at the camera bag against her side and thought about 47 photographs and Camilla's name in a file she hadn't known existed, and Paul Dern saying the coverage disappears with a calm that meant he'd made this calculation long before today. "All right," she said. She reached into her shoulder bag with her free hand. The guard tracked the movement. Her fingers found the compact camera, found the memory card release. She pressed it without looking, by feel alone, the same way she changed cards in the dark at long-exposure night shoots. She'd done it hundreds of times. And the card ejected into her palm. The guard saw her hand come out of the bag, and he grabbed it, opened it. The bag was open, the camera visible inside. He looked at her palm. Empty. He looked at the bag. She let him search it. He found the camera. No card. His jaw set. "Where is it?" "Where's what?" she said. He looked at her. At the bag. At her. He was calculating. She could see it. Whether to escalate, whether this was the moment, whether pulling apart a woman's jacket in the lobby of a professional building was an action his authorization covered. It wasn't. The revolving door moved. Luca DeLuca came through it from the outside. He had not come from upstairs. He had exited the building through another route. The parking structure access, she realized later, which connected to the lobby on the far side, and come back around. He was in his coat, the same one from the airport, and he moved through the revolving door with that absolute weatherless quality, and he stopped when he saw her, took in the situation in less than 2 seconds. The guard, the grip, the open bag. The guard saw him. Whatever Luca's face did in that moment, she couldn't see it from her angle. The guard's hand released her arm. Luca crossed the lobby in 8 steps. He didn't hurry. He didn't need to. He stopped beside her and put one hand at the small of her back. Light, informational, the touch of someone who was establishing a position rather than expressing one, and looked at the guard with an expression she couldn't read from the side, and clearly the guard could. "My associate is late for an appointment," Luca said. Quiet. Even. Like he was mentioning weather. The guard said nothing. They walked to the door. Outside, the cold hit her face and she breathed it in hard, once, and kept walking. Luca's hand stayed at her back. 2 of his men materialized from somewhere to a parked car, a doorway, she hadn't tracked where, and they were on either side of them as they moved down the sidewalk and around the corner into the side street where a black car was idling. She got in. Luca got in beside her. The doors closed. The car moved. She opened her hand. The memory card sat in her palm, small and ordinary, the kind of object you could lose between sofa cushions. 47 photographs. Paul Dern's secondary accounts. The email chain, the reference codes, every piece of it. She looked at Luca. He was looking at her hand, then at her face. Something in his expression that wasn't quite what she expected. Not satisfaction, not calculation. Something more immediate than that. "You're bleeding," he said. She looked down, her palm, where she'd held the card in a closed fist during the guard's search. She'd pressed the edge of it hard enough that there was a thin line of red along the heel of her hand. She hadn't felt it. "It's nothing," she said. "Tell me what you found." She told him. All of it. Paul Dern, the secondary accounts, the email chain, the money being siphoned from Moretti's own operation. The structure that Camilla had unknowingly built. The coverage that Dern claimed was tied to his continued presence. The fact that her sister's name was in a file somewhere that had nothing to do with Meridian's records, and that restructuring Camilla's administrative documents, the thing Luca had done 48 hours ago, the thing she'd built her agreement on, might not be enough. Luca listened without interrupting. The city moved past the windows. She talked until there was nothing left to say, and then she stopped and waited. His face was very still. "He was telling the truth," Luca said. Not a question. "About Camilla's exposure, yes. I believe he was. And the file he mentioned, outside the building. I don't know what's in it. I don't know who built it." She looked at the card in her hand. "But if there's a compromised channel inside the federal investigation, if someone in that chain has been working against the case, they have been," Luca said. Flat, absolute. No hesitation. She looked at him. "You knew." "I knew there was a leak inside the investigative structure. I didn't know it had been used to build a secondary case, positioning Meridian's support staff as operational rather than administrative." His jaw moved. "That's new. That's Dern's work, not Moretti's. Moretti doesn't think that laterally." "Dern was protecting himself," Serena said, "building a case against the people around him as insurance. If Moretti turned on him, if anyone turned on him, he had a file full of other names to offer, including your sister's. including my sisters. The car turned. She didn't know where they were going. She looked out the window and recognized the river. They were on the west side approach, the old industrial corridor. Buildings on her left she'd photographed in the early days of her career when she was still finding her eye, and everything felt like discovery. "What do we do?" she said. Luca was quiet for a long moment. The river moved outside the window, gray and indifferent, carrying its cold water south the same way it always had, regardless of what happened on its banks. "Thursday changes," he said. "Everything I planned for today's meeting, Moretti was the target. Moretti is still the target, but Dern moves on his own timeline now, and his timeline is accelerated. He knows we have the documents. He'll make contact with his people inside the investigation within hours." He turned to look at her. "The 48 hours I told you Camilla had, it's not 48 hours anymore." "How long?" He looked at her steadily. "Tonight," he said. "Whatever we do, it has to be tonight." Serena looked at the memory card, at the blood on her palm, already drying, already becoming something smaller than it had felt. At the city outside the window, and somewhere in it, her sister in an apartment taking fever medication and believing that tomorrow was going to be a normal day. "Then tell me what tonight looks like," she said. Her voice was level, completely level. She noted this with that same distant observational quality from the lobby, watching herself stay functional, watching herself sound like someone who had already decided. Because she had. She just didn't know yet what Luca was about to tell her, and she didn't know that the thing he was about to say would require her to become. "Tonight looks like this," Luca said. He turned from the window, and the river disappeared behind them as the car moved north. His voice had the quality it got when he was past deliberation and into execution. Not colder exactly, but stripped of everything that wasn't necessary. Moretti has a second location, not the Meridian building, a private facility on the east waterfront, a converted warehouse he uses for meetings that can't happen in corporate spaces. He'll move there tonight when he understands that today's conference meeting didn't go the way he expected. "You walked out of his conference room." "I walked out midway through. My people stayed. Moretti doesn't know yet why I left." He paused. "He will in approximately 4 hours when Dern calls him. Dern will tell him you had someone in the building. Dern will tell him I have the secondary account documentation, which means Dern's arrangement with Moretti's infrastructure is exposed, which means both of them are moving to the same place tonight to decide what to do about it." He looked at her. "They'll both be there. Together. In a location with no civilian presence, no corporate cover, no performance of legitimacy." Serena understood what he was saying. "You planned for this. I planned for Moretti. Dern is new, but the destination is the same. You're going to that warehouse tonight." "Yes." "With enough people to end it." "Yes." She looked at the memory card still in her hand. "And the documentation I pulled. The secondary accounts? Where does that go?" "To a federal contact, I trust. Not the compromised channel. A separate one. Someone who has been waiting for material this specific for 8 months. He held out his hand, not demanding, offering the transaction. "The card goes to him tonight, before we move on the warehouse. That's the sequence." She looked at his hand, at the card. She thought about 47 photographs, about Paul Dern's email chain and the reference codes and the offshore routing notations in pencil, as if pencil made them less criminal. She thought about what Camilla had said. "I'm not stupid, Serena." She put the card in his palm. "The federal contact," she said. "He can move on Dern's file, the one with Camilla's name. That's what I'm asking him to do first, before anything else." She nodded once. Not relief. Too early for that. But the functional satisfaction of a decision made and committed to. She turned to look out the window and watched the city go past and breathed. "What do you need from me tonight?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Nothing," he said. "Tonight you stay out of it." She turned back. "That's not Serena." Her name, short, with a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Not authority exactly. Something more exposed than that. "What happens at that warehouse tonight is not something you photograph. It's not something you document. It's not something I want you anywhere near." He held her gaze. "You've done what I needed. The rest is mine." She looked at him for a long moment, at the thing in his expression that he was mostly not showing. She thought about the airport, about the coffee and the car and the floor plan and 48 hours of building towards something she'd walked into with a camera and a borrowed ID and her sister's signature. "Okay," she said. He nodded. "But I'm calling Camilla," she said. "Right now. I'm not leaving her in that apartment tonight without knowing she needs to stay there." "Call her," he said. "Tell her nothing specific. Tell her to stay home tonight and not answer calls from numbers she doesn't know." Serena called. Camilla answered on the second ring, sounding better than yesterday. The fever breaking, the voice clearer. Serena told her she loved her, and that she needed her to stay in tonight and not open the door for anyone she wasn't expecting, and that she would explain everything tomorrow. Camilla asked 3 questions, each one sharper than the last, and Serena said tomorrow, "I promise, just tonight," and Camilla said fine in the voice she used when fine meant, "I know something is wrong and I'm choosing to trust you anyway." She hung up. They were in a part of the city she didn't photograph, a gray industrial section north of the river. Wide streets and low buildings, and the smell of the water mixed with machinery. The car stopped outside a building that looked like a former distribution center, unmarked, its facade the studied blankness of a place that preferred not to be looked at. "You're staying here," Luca said. "2 of my people will be with you. You don't leave until I contact you. And if you don't contact me..." He looked at her, just looked for 1 full second, and said nothing, and she felt the weight of that nothing. Everything it contained about what tonight could be, about what he was walking toward, about the calculation he'd been running for 18 months that was now arriving at its final hour. "I'll contact you," he said. He got out of the car. She watched him walk toward the building, where 3 men were already waiting, and the door opened before he reached it, and he went in, and the door closed. She sat in the car with her hands in her lap. The driver didn't move. She looked at her palm. The thin line of red from the memory card, almost gone now, already becoming a small scar she'd have to explain to herself later. She waited. She lasted 40 minutes. 40 minutes of sitting in a room inside the distribution building with 2 of Luca's men who were professionally courteous and professionally immovable and who provided her with coffee and a chair and absolutely no information. The room had a window that looked onto an interior corridor and a clock on the wall and nothing else to engage with except the weight of everything she knew and couldn't act on. At minute 41, she stood up. "I need air," she said. The closer of the 2 men looked at her. Mr. DeLuca's instructions were for me not to leave. The building has a loading dock. I'm asking for 5 minutes on the dock. She kept her voice even. Reasonable. The voice of someone making a small, normal request, and not the voice of someone who had already made a different decision. "Please." The man looked at his colleague. Some form of communication passed between them. Not words, the shorter language of people who worked together and had established shorthand. The first man stood. "I'll come with you." The loading dock was at the back of the building, a wide concrete platform accessible through a heavy door with a push bar. Outside, the cold hit her immediately. Real cold. The kind that had arrived from somewhere north without apology, carrying the river smell and the industrial smell and the particular silence of a part of the city where nobody lived. She stood at the edge of the dock and looked at the street below. The guard stood behind her, near the door. She thought about the warehouse on the east waterfront. She knew the east waterfront. She'd shot it 2 summers ago. A series on post-industrial architecture, the bones of a city that used to make things, the texture of abandonment. She'd walked those streets for 3 consecutive weekends. She knew which buildings had been converted and which hadn't. She knew the waterfront access road and the secondary streets and the loading approaches. She knew exactly where a converted warehouse would be. She pulled out her phone, opened the map. The East Waterfront District was 6 minutes by car from where she was standing, and the car that had brought her here was still parked on the street below the dock. She looked at it, looked at the guard behind her. She turned around. "I need my camera bag. It's in the front seat. There's a memory card I need to..." "I'll get it," the guard said. He turned to go inside. She had the push bar under her hands before the door finished swinging, and she was off the dock in 1 step, landing on the street below with an impact that went straight up through her knees, and she was running before she'd finished absorbing it, not toward the car but away from it, around the corner and into the gray industrial block. And she heard the door bang open behind her and the guard's voice. And then she was around the corner and into a street she recognized from the Waterfront series. And she did not stop. She flagged a cab 2 blocks north. East Waterfront, she said, getting in. Converted industrial, the stretch past the old grain elevators. The driver looked at her in the mirror, at her face, which she realized must look like something. You okay? Appointment, she said. I'm late. He drove. Her phone was already going. 3 calls in fast succession from a number she didn't recognize that she knew was one of the men from the room. She silenced it, looked out the window and watched the city unspool and thought very carefully about what she was doing and why. And the answer she arrived at was the same one she'd arrived at in her apartment at 6 in the morning 2 days ago when the floor plan had arrived on her phone. She was going because she could not sit in a room and wait. She was going because she had walked every step of this herself, and she needed to see where it ended. And she was going because some part of her that she couldn't argue with had decided, somewhere between the airport and the archive and the lobby and the car, that she was not going to let Luca DeLuca walk into the last room of this thing alone, while she sat 40 minutes away drinking coffee that somebody else poured. The cab stopped at the waterfront access road. She paid and got out, and the cab left, and she was alone on a street that she knew from a camera's perspective, and now had to know from the ground. The warehouse was the 3rd building past the grain elevators, exactly where she'd placed it from the map. A converted 1940s freight facility. She'd photographed its exterior from 2 blocks away during the architectural series, noted the original timber frame construction visible through the newer cladding on the north face, noted the loading doors that had been replaced with steel roll-ups. 3 stories. Ground floor operational, upper floors uncertain. From half a block away in the dark, with the waterfront wind cutting through her jacket like it had a purpose, she could see lights in the ground floor windows. Not overhead lights, the moving, variable light of portable work lamps. And vehicles parked along the building's south face, 4 of them, dark, positioned the way vehicles were positioned when people inside were not planning to be there long. She stayed in the shadow of a concrete pillar supporting the elevated freight line overhead and watched. Her phone buzzed. Not the unknown number this time. Luca. She answered before it finished the first ring. Where are you? His voice was very quiet and very precisely controlled, and she could hear underneath the control something that was not calm. East Waterfront, she said. I'm outside. Silence. 2 seconds that had a texture. I told you to stay. I know. Serena, tell me what's happening inside, she said. Tell me right now and I stay out here. Don't tell me and I walk toward those vehicles. A longer silence. The wind moved past the pillar and she turned her face against it. It hasn't started yet, he said. Moretti arrived 20 minutes ago. Dern is with him. They're talking. His voice dropped further. I'm not inside yet. I'm on the north approach. You're outside too. I came through the back first. There are more people with Moretti than expected. A pause. Stay where you are. I mean it. How many more? 7. He brought 7 additional. He knew today wasn't routine. Another pause. He was more prepared than I gave him credit for. She looked at the vehicles. 4 of them. If Moretti had traveled with 7 additional people, those 4 vehicles plus whatever else was around the back made a number that sat uncomfortably against what she knew of Luca's usual movements. You're short, she said. We're not short. Luca. The name, Bear, landed between them the way it had in the archive doorway when she'd said it to Dern, and it had meant something different than the word usually meant. She heard him exhale. Once. Very controlled. We have enough, he said, but the window is narrow. We move in 4 minutes. Another pause. Stay behind the pillar. Don't move unless I tell you. If you hear shooting, you run north, not south. The south end of the road is where they'll come out if there's a retreat. Okay. Serena, I'm here. When this is over. He stopped. Restarted. Don't take any photographs. She looked at the camera bag she'd somehow had on her shoulder for this entire insane evening. Thought about her answer. Okay, she said. He hung up. She waited behind the pillar and watched the building and counted her own heartbeats because it was something to do with her mind. The waterfront was completely still. No other movement, no other lights, just the black water south of the road and the building and the vehicles and the sky doing nothing overhead. At 4 minutes exactly, the south entrance opened. Not burst, opened, controlled. Two of Luca's men came through it with the efficient, decisive movement of people executing a pre-established plan, and everything that followed happened in the compressed, overlapping sequence of events that moved faster than understanding could follow in real time. Shouting from inside, a crash, something heavy, structural, a table, or equipment. The portable work lights went out and then came back, and the ground floor windows went from steady to chaotic with moving shadows, and she could hear voices, multiple voices. The thick overlapping sound of a confrontation, where everyone was speaking at once and nobody was listening. A gunshot, then 3 more in fast succession from a different location. The back of the building, she thought, the north face where Luca had said he was approaching. Serena pressed her back against the pillar and stayed still the way he'd told her, and watched the south entrance where his 2 men had gone in and thought about the 7 additional people Moretti had brought and did the arithmetic in her head and did not like the result. The south entrance opened again. A man came out running. Not one of Luca's, different bearing, different movement. The flight pattern of someone who had decided that exit was better than continuation. He hit the street and turned south and ran toward the vehicles. Serena was out from behind the pillar before she'd consciously decided to move. She didn't know what she was going to do. She had no weapon, no training beyond a single self-defense class, no plan. What she had was the very specific, non-negotiable understanding that south was wrong. Luca had said south was the retreat path, and the man running south was heading for the vehicles, and the vehicles had keys in them, and a man in flight with a car was a different equation than a man in flight on foot. She got to the nearest vehicle first, not because she was fast. She wasn't fast enough for that, because she knew this road. She'd walked this road with a camera on a Sunday morning, and she'd noticed the freight access ramp that cut across the south end of the waterfront road, a raised concrete ramp that narrowed the vehicle path to a single lane. She knew exactly where it was. She stood in the middle of the road at the base of that ramp, in the dark, and when the running man reached the nearest vehicle and pulled the door open and started the engine, the headlights came on and she was directly in them. The car stopped. The driver's window came down. The man looked at her. He was younger than she expected, late 30s, the face of someone who had been in controlled environments long enough to have lost the ability to fully read uncontrolled ones. He looked at the woman standing in his headlights, with a camera bag over her shoulder and no discernible reason to be on a waterfront road at this hour. "Move," he said. "No," she said. She had no plan beyond this. She just needed him to not move for as long as it took for whatever was happening in the building to resolve itself. And she needed him to make the calculation that a civilian woman in his headlights was a problem he'd have to explain later if he went through her. He got out of the car. She hadn't counted on that. He was taller than the vehicle had suggested, and he moved with the particular directness of someone who had run out of patience. He came around the front of the car toward her, and she backed up and hit the ramp wall behind her and had nowhere else to go. "Last chance," he said. She opened her camera bag. He stopped, looked at the camera coming up, looked at her. She saw the recognition cross his face, the same recognition she saw on building owners who didn't want to be documented, on subjects who understood that a lens was a different kind of weapon, slower but permanent. She took his photograph. The flash hit him full in the face and he flinched, and she took 2 more and he grabbed for the camera and she let him grab it, let his hands close around it and pull. And then she didn't let go, and they were both holding it, and his face was 18 inches from hers, and she said very clearly, 4 photographs on a memory card that's already been copied and transferred tonight. Your face, your car, this road, that building. She jerked her head backward toward the warehouse. "Let go!" He looked at her. Something moved through his expression. Complex, fast, the rapid recalculation of a man being asked to weigh options in real time with incomplete information. The warehouse door opened behind him. He turned. Luca. DeLuca came out of the south entrance. He was not moving fast. He was moving with the measured, absolute pace of a man who had just come from somewhere and had arrived precisely where he intended to be. His coat had a tear at the shoulder. There was blood on his jaw. Not much, but present, from a cut above his cheekbone that had stopped bleeding on its own. He looked at the man with his hands on Serena's camera. He looked at Serena. "Let go of her camera," he said. The man let go. 2 of Luca's people appeared at the warehouse entrance behind him. The man looked at them, looked at Luca. Did the arithmetic that Serena had done standing behind the pillar and arrived at the same uncomfortable result? Except this time, the arithmetic concerned his own position. He put his hands up, slowly. The particular careful movement of someone who understood that this moment required precision. One of Luca's men stepped forward and handled the rest of it. Luca reached Serena in 4 steps. He stopped close, closer than he'd stood to her since the car, since the proximity of the Honda at 5 in the morning when he'd smelled like cedar and decision. He looked at her face, at the camera in her hands, at the ramp wall behind her. "I told you to stay north," he said. "He was going south." "I know. You said south was the exit route." "I know what I said. So I stayed south." She looked at him, at the cut on his cheekbone. "Are you—" "I'm fine." He said it the same way Camilla said it, she noticed. The reflex answer, the one that came before the assessment. "Are you?" She looked at herself. Camera bag, intact, both hands. Her left knee was telling her something about the dock jump from earlier that she'd been ignoring and would apparently need to address. "I'm fine." He looked at her for a moment longer. The particular quality of attention he'd been giving her since the airport, the reading something legible quality, except more acute now, stripped of the layers that the negotiation and the planning and the operational distance had put between them. Just the look itself. "Moretti," she said. "Inside." His jaw moved. "Dern, too." "Both, Dern is talking," he said. He made the right calculation. A pause. Moretti made a different one. She understood what that meant. She let the understanding settle without looking directly at it, the same way she'd learned to not look directly at the sun when she was trying to see the color of the sky around it. "The federal contact," she said. "The card already sent 2 hours ago. He's moving tonight." He reached up and, without announcing the intention, touched her face, a single light contact along her jaw, checking for something, injury or presence or both. And then his hand came away, and the night air was cold where it had been. "Camilla's file," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "It's done," he said. "I told you it was done." "Tell me again." He looked at her. "It's done," he said. "Her name is clean, both channels." She nodded. Her legs were doing something she was not going to acknowledge in front of him. The long adrenaline burn of the last 3 hours was reaching the end of its runway, and her body was beginning to understand that it needed to stop and be somewhere horizontal for an extended period. She leaned back against the ramp wall and let it hold some of the weight. "The photographs I took," she said, "of the man. They'll be useful." "I know." She looked at the camera. "I'm keeping copies." "I expected that." "I'm not apologizing for it." "I'm not asking you to." He almost said something else. She could see it in the way the sentence ended, not finished, contained. He turned and said something to the nearest of his people in a low voice she didn't catch, and the man nodded and moved, and the practical machinery of the aftermath began its work. She stood against the ramp wall and watched it, the controlled, methodical process of a situation being resolved by people who had resolved situations before. The vehicles, the building, the careful management of evidence and geography and everything that would need to not exist in certain forms by morning. Somewhere across the city, her sister was in an apartment staying home and not asking questions she'd been promised answers to tomorrow. Somewhere in the federal system, a contact was receiving a memory card transfer and beginning to move on a case that had been building for 18 months and was now, tonight, arriving at a conclusion. And here, on the east waterfront, in the cold, in the dark, on a road she'd walked with a camera on a Sunday morning without knowing what was inside the buildings, something was finishing. The shape of it still unclear, still being determined by people doing their work in the light of portable work lamps, but finishing. She looked at Luca's back, at the set of his shoulders, at the tear in his coat, at the blood on his jaw that he hadn't touched, and that she hadn't been able to stop looking at since he'd come through that door. He turned, as if he'd felt her looking. She held the look. He crossed the space between them and stood in front of her, and she could see all of it now. The exhaustion he was keeping functional, the cost of the evening written in the controlled stillness of a man who had been expending everything precise and cold for hours, and was now at the edge of the distance from which he'd been managing it. The cut on his cheekbone, the set of his jaw. "You could have been hurt," he said. "I wasn't." "That's not Luca. His name." She said it the way she'd said it to Dern in the archive doorway, bare and direct, meaning more than the syllables. "I know." She held his gaze. "I know what it's not. I know what it could have been. I know what you're going to say, and you're right about all of it." She pushed off the ramp wall and stood fully upright and met him at the level. "And I'm still not sorry I came." He looked at her for a long time. Something in his face moved. Not the fractional almost something from the cafe, not the contained half response she'd been cataloging since the airport. This was more than that, something that had been held with considerable effort for considerable time, releasing at its own pace, unannounced. "I know," he said. His voice was different, not quieter, lower, the difference between volume and depth. "I know you're not." One of his men called his name from the warehouse entrance. He held her gaze for one more second. 2. Then he turned and went back toward the building and the work that wasn't finished yet. And she watched him go. And the waterfront was cold around her, and the water was black to the south, and the city was doing what it always did. Turning, indifferent, magnificent, full of architecture that told the truth about what was inside it if you knew how to look. She raised the camera, not at the building, at him, at his back, at the coat with the tear at the shoulder, and the way the portable work lights caught the edge of him against the dark doorway. She looked through the viewfinder. She didn't take the picture. She lowered the camera and stood with it in her hands, and felt the shape of the evening pressing against all sides of her. Dern in the archive doorway, the memory card in her palm, the guard's grip on her arm, the cab ride, the pillar, the headlights, the flash, his hand on her face, all of it running together into a single continuous thing that didn't have a name yet. From inside the warehouse, a sound, not gunfire, not the blunt impact language of a physical confrontation. A voice raised, then stopped, then silence, then nothing. Serena stood on the waterfront road and waited for Luca De Luca to come back through the door, and the city turned overhead, and somewhere in the building, Vincent Moretti's empire was arriving at its final. The door opened at 11:47 p.m. Serena had been standing on the waterfront road for 19 minutes. She knew because she'd been watching the time on her phone with the particular fixed attention of someone who needed numbers to hold on to while everything else stayed unresolved. The cold had worked through her jacket and settled into her shoulders. Her left knee had stopped being polite about the dock jump. She'd taken 3 photographs of the water and deleted all of them because they weren't what she was trying to capture, and she didn't know yet what that was. Luca came through the door. He walked toward her with the same measured pace she'd cataloged since the terminal. The same controlled displacement, but something underneath it was different now. A weight that hadn't been there before, or had been there and was now visible in a way it hadn't permitted itself to be until this moment. He stopped in front of her. The cut on his cheekbone had dried dark. His coat was still torn at the shoulder. He looked at her face the way he always did, reading whatever it was he read there. "It's done," he said. 2 words. She'd heard them from him before, about Camilla's file, about the federal contact, but this time they carried something heavier. Not the clean finality of a task completed, but the particular weight of an ending that cost something and didn't pretend otherwise. "Moretti," she said. "Won't be a problem." His voice was even. "For anyone." She looked at him, at the dried blood, at the tear in the coat, at his hands, which were at his sides, still. She thought about what had happened in the building. The sound that wasn't gunfire and wasn't combat, the voice raised and then stopped. And she let herself understand it fully without looking away from it. This was what it meant. This was the other side of the thing she'd agreed to, the part that happened while she stood behind pillars and in headlights and against ramp walls and told herself she was useful. "And Dern," she said, "talking." A pause. "He'll talk to the right people tomorrow morning. His arrangement with us is he cooperates completely. Every account, every name, every routing chain. In exchange, he gets what he negotiated." "Which is what?" "Time," Luca said. "To be somewhere else before the federal case names him publicly." She thought about that. About Paul Dern in the archive doorway, managing his risk with both hands. About the coverage he'd built around Camilla as insurance for himself. About the fact that even his protection of her sister had been, at its core, a transaction. "Is that justice?" she said. Luca looked at her steadily. "It's the answer that gets Camilla's file closed permanently and gets the names in those accounts prosecuted before anyone can move the money." He paused. "Justice is a longer conversation. Tonight I settled for functional." She nodded. She understood functional. She'd been running on it for 3 days. One of his men appeared at the warehouse entrance and said something she couldn't hear at this distance. Luca turned his head and answered in the same low register, and the man went back inside. When Luca looked at her again, something had shifted in his expression. The operational layer was pulling back slowly, the way tide pulled back from a shore, revealing whatever was underneath. "I need to finish here," he said. "An hour, maybe 2. He paused. "Will you wait?" It was the first thing he'd asked her that wasn't connected to a plan or a sequence or a requirement. Just, "Will you wait?" Standing on a waterfront road at midnight with her knee aching and her camera in her hands and the cold working on her from every direction. "Yes," she said. He went back inside. She found a concrete barrier at the edge of the freight road and sat on it and pulled her jacket tighter and waited. And the city turned around her, and the water was black and indifferent and very beautiful in the way that large, dark things were beautiful when you weren't afraid of them. And she sat with everything that had happened since a rainy Tuesday morning and let it be what it was. The call to Camilla happened at 12:23 a.m. Serena sat on the concrete barrier with the phone at her ear and watched one of Luca's vehicles pull away from the warehouse and disappear north, and talked to her sister for 22 minutes. She told her most of it. Not everything. Not the waterfront road, not the warehouse, not the sound that wasn't gunfire, but the shape of it. Meridian. Moretti. Dern. What had been running inside the company she'd spent 8 months building her career on. What her administrative work had been used for. What was coming. The federal case, the prosecution, the collapse of the firm's criminal structure. Camilla was quiet for most of it. Not the silence of someone shutting down. The silence of someone processing. Serena knew the difference. She'd been listening to her sister's silences since childhood. "I knew," Camilla said, finally. Not loudly, not with the drama of someone making a confession. Just, "I knew." Not the specifics, but I knew the thing you're not supposed to look at directly was there. I needed the job, Serena. I needed it to be okay. "I know. Is my name?" "Your name is clean," Serena said. "Both channels. It's done." She paused. "I promise." Another silence. Longer. When Camilla spoke again, her voice had the texture of someone who had been holding something for a long time and was beginning carefully to put it down. "Who helped you?" she said. Not demanding, just knowing her sister. Serena looked at the warehouse, at the light still moving in the ground floor windows. "Someone who had reasons of his own," she said, "and did it anyway." Camilla processed this. "Are you safe?" "Yes." Serena, are you okay?" She thought about the question, really thought about it, the way she hadn't had space to since the airport on Tuesday morning. "I will be," she said. "Ask me again in a week." She could hear her sister breathe, in and out. The particular sound of Camilla doing what she'd always done, recalibrating, rebuilding the functional version of herself on whatever new ground was available. "Okay," Camilla said. "I'm going to sleep. And tomorrow, you're going to explain everything." A pause. "All of it." "All of it," Serena agreed. "I love you," Camilla said, the same way she always said it, low, real, no performance. "I love you," Serena said. She hung up and sat with the dead phone in her hands and felt, for the first time in 72 hours, something that wasn't bracing for what came next. Something quieter. Not peace exactly. Too soon for that. And she was honest enough not to call it what it wasn't. But the absence of the specific weight she'd been carrying since 4:47 Tuesday morning. The weight of not knowing whether her sister was going to be okay. Camilla was going to be okay. Everything else was still complicated and unresolved, and she'd have to live inside the consequences of the past 3 days for a very long time. But that one thing was settled, and it was the only thing she'd actually started any of this for. She looked at her camera, raised it, shot the water. This time she kept the photograph. Luca came out at 1:54 a.m. He walked to where she was sitting and stopped. He had taken the coat off somewhere inside. He was in the dark sweater, no coat, and cold that had dropped another 4 degrees since midnight, and either he didn't feel it or had made a decision not to acknowledge it. The cut on his cheekbone had been cleaned. Someone inside had dealt with it. A piece of medical tape holding the edge together, small and precise. He looked at her on the concrete barrier, at the camera in her lap. "You kept the one of the water," he said. "How do you know?" "You look different when you've kept something." She looked at him. "You've known me for 3 days." 2.5, he said, but they were specific days. She stood up. Her knee announced itself, and she let it. She'd been ignoring it for 4 hours, and it had earned its grievance. She was eye level with his chin standing up, and she looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and the waterfront was very quiet around them, just the water and the distant machinery of the city going about its permanent business. "What happens now?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. The honest kind of quiet, not the calculating kind. "The federal case moves this week. Dern's cooperation plus the documentation from the archive. The prosecution has what they need. The surviving elements of Moretti's network get absorbed or removed over the next few months. The Meridian building goes through receivership and comes out as something legitimate." He paused. "The city will barely notice." "The city never notices?" she said. "No." "And you?" He looked at her. "I go back to what I was doing," he said. "The same things. Different problems." "That doesn't bother you." "What I do bothers me considerably," he said, with a directness she hadn't expected. No evasion, no reframe. "It has for a while. I'm not asking you to feel something about it. I'm just not going to pretend otherwise." She looked at his face, at the medical tape on his cheekbone, at the exhaustion that was fully visible now, no longer being managed or contained, just present, doing what exhaustion did when there was nothing left to perform for. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and had set it down for a moment, not because it was gone, but because his arms needed to rest. "The gallery," she said. "My exhibition." "Ah." Something moved through his expression. "You financed it." It wasn't a question. She'd been thinking about it since the conversation about Meridian had spilled into the personal, since she'd started understanding how much Luca DeLuca knew about her before she knew anything about him. "The Ashworth Gallery approached me 2 months ago with an offer I didn't understand how I'd qualified for. I've been good, but I haven't been that visible. The funding structure was, I didn't look at it hard enough." "You were focused on the work," he said. "That's not a flaw." "Did you finance my gallery exhibition?" He met her eyes without looking away. "I was aware of your work before the airport," he said. "The architectural series. The waterfront photographs." His voice was even. "When the gallery opportunity came up, I ensured the funding was in place. The work deserved the showing. That had nothing to do with what came after." She sat with this. "You were watching me before Tuesday." "Not watching. I'd seen the work." A pause. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." He said it quietly. "I don't surveil civilians for entertainment. I saw a series of photographs in a trade publication 14 months ago. Your waterfront series. Buildings that people had stopped looking at. I thought..." He stopped. Started again. "I thought whoever took those photographs understood something about the world that most people didn't." She looked at the water. At the buildings she'd photographed 2 summers ago, now standing in their ordinary dark, not knowing they were being looked at again from a different angle entirely. "And then I showed up at your airport pickup. With a cardboard sign and a very old Honda," he said. She heard the thing in his voice, not quite the corner of mouth, almost something from Constantine's, something more open than that, more tired, more real. "You let me drive you across the city," she said. "Yes. Because I didn't look at you the way people usually do." "Yes." A pause. "And because I was tired," he said, "of everything being calculated. I got into your car because you had the wrong sign and you were annoyed about the rain, and you told me about the printing house on Lenox Hill, and for 20 minutes nothing was strategic." He looked at her directly. "I haven't had 20 minutes like that in a very long time." The waterfront was quiet. The water moved. Somewhere north, a siren ran its brief complaint and faded. Serena looked at Luca DeLuca in the cold, in the dark, At 1:56 in the morning, with the medical tape on his cheekbone and the exhaustion, he wasn't hiding anymore, and the thing he'd just said sitting between them, true and exposed and not looking for anything in particular from her. She thought about what he was. Not the version the city whispered about. She'd stopped needing that version to be the whole story somewhere around the second coffee at Constantine's. The actual version. The man who got into a stranger's car because 20 minutes of ordinary was worth the complication. The man who protected her sister before the terms were settled because he'd already decided to. The man who stood in a building all night dismantling something he'd told her honestly bothered him, because it needed to be done and he was the person available to do it. She thought about what she was. The woman who'd driven across the city at 5 in the morning for her sister, who'd stood in an archive doorway and refused to hand over a memory card, who'd jumped off a loading dock and stood in headlights because south was the wrong direction, and someone had to know that. Two people who had made a wrong turn and ended up somewhere neither of them had mapped. "Come to the gallery opening," she said. He looked at her. "February 19th, she said. "Ashworth Gallery, 7 p.m. Don't send anyone ahead to check the room and don't arrive with 4 people and don't wear the coat that has blood on the shoulder." She looked at him steadily. "Come because you want to see the photographs, that's all." He was quiet for a moment, the genuine kind. "And after the photographs," he said. "After the photographs," she said, "there's a Greek cafe 2 blocks from the gallery whose owner will describe his roasting machine to you in considerable detail whether you ask or not." The corner of his mouth moved. This time, it went all the way. Not a performance. Not the fractional contained response she'd been cataloging since the terminal. A real thing, arriving on its own terms, changing his face in a way she'd suspected it might since the first morning, and hadn't been able to look away from fast enough. She didn't look away this time. The federal case broke publicly 11 days later. It led the financial news cycle for 3 days and the general news cycle for 2. The coverage named Vincent Moretti, his companies, his networks, the offshore structures, the arms procurement connections, the trafficking money that had moved through legitimate-looking accounts for 4 years. It named Paul Dern as a cooperating witness. It named several others. It described Meridian Associates as a financial front now in federal receivership. It did not name Camilla Vale. Not in any document, not in any filing, not in the background briefings that journalists used to build their stories. Her name appeared nowhere in the public record because it appeared nowhere in the relevant private records, because the records that had existed had been restructured with surgical precision by someone who knew exactly what he was doing and had done it before anyone asked him to. Camilla called Serena the morning the story broke. She'd been awake since 5, she said, watching her phone. She'd known it was coming. Serena had told her enough that she wasn't blindsided, but knowing and seeing were different, and her voice had the shaken quality of someone watching a building she'd worked in for 8 months be described on the news as a criminal enterprise. "I keep thinking about the things I processed," Camilla said, "the transactions. I keep trying to figure out which ones were, if any of what I did directly." "Cam, I can't just not think about it." "I know, but think about it differently." Serena was at her desk, looking at the photograph she'd kept from the waterfront. The black water, the far buildings, the particular quality of light on a cold surface at midnight. "You did your job. You did it well. You didn't know what you were building, and when you suspected something was wrong, you stayed because you needed to. That's not a crime. That's being human." A long silence. "I'm resigning," Camilla said. "Obviously." "Yes. I'm going to take some time. Figure out what I need to not be inside a corporate structure for a while. I need to be able to see the whole thing before I decide." "That sounds right." "I might go back to school." A pause. "Finish the economics degree." "You'd be good at that." "I was good at the job," Camilla said. "The legitimate parts. I was genuinely good at it." She said it with a quiet defiance that Serena recognized as the spine of her. The thing that had survived their mother leaving and their father's silence and 8 months of working for a man she was afraid of, and a fever, and a night of being told to stay home without explanation. "I'm still good at it. Whatever I do next, I'll be good at." "I know," Serena said. "Thank you," Camilla said, low and real. "For the soup? And for the rest of it?" "Always," Serena said. After she hung up, she sat at her desk for a long time and looked at the photograph of the water and thought about the particular shape of the past 2 weeks. The cardboard sign, the rain, the Honda, Constantine's, the floor plan, the archive, the ramp wall, the headlights, the medical tape, the almost smile that had become a real one at 1:56 in the morning on the east waterfront. She opened her laptop and began editing the waterfront photographs. She worked for 4 hours. The whole series, everything she'd shot 2 summers ago, plus the 2 photographs from the waterfront road on Thursday night, which she placed at the end of the sequence. The progression made sense in a way she hadn't planned. Buildings observed from distance, from respect, from the patience of someone who understood that architecture told the truth about what it was. And then the final 2, shot from inside the story instead of outside it, with the different quality that gave them. She titled the series, What Buildings Know. She sent the file to the gallery at 5 in the afternoon. She ran into Luca 10 days before the opening. Not planned, she'd been shooting in the Lenox Hill neighborhood, the printing house on the corner. The one whose owner had refused her access twice, and this time had called her because something in the news cycle had apparently made him reconsider the value of documentation, and he'd offered her a full interior shoot. She'd spent 3 hours inside the building, in the rooms where the presses still sat in the basement like iron monuments to a version of the city that was gone. And she'd come out into the late afternoon cold with her camera bag full, and her mind still half inside the machinery. He was on the sidewalk across the street, not waiting for her thigh. She understood that immediately. The posture was wrong for waiting. He was standing, looking up at the building's facade, at the arched windows she'd told him about in the car on a rainy Tuesday morning. One of his people was 20 feet back, giving the impression of distance without actually providing it. Luca's hands were in his coat pockets. A different coat, she noticed, no tear at the shoulder. And his face was tilted up toward the stone arch above the windows with an expression of genuine, unhurried attention. He hadn't seen her yet. She raised her camera, shot him from across the street. A man looking up at a building he'd asked about in the dark, looking at it now in daylight, alone. The frame caught him between the printing house on his right and the winter sky above, the city running its ordinary traffic on either side of him, indifferent and magnificent. She looked at the image in the viewfinder, kept it. She crossed the street. He heard her footsteps and turned when she was still 4 feet away, and something in his face did the thing. Not the corner-of-mouth fractional response, but the fuller version, the one from the waterfront, the one she'd been trying not to think about too specifically, because thinking about it specifically made it harder to edit photographs with the necessary detachment. "The printing house," she said. "You got access," he said. "I got access." He looked at her camera bag, at her face, at the cold that had put color into her cheeks the way cold always did. "Good light today?" "The basement was extraordinary," she said. "The presses, the way the light comes down through the freight hatches at this time of year. It's almost horizontal. It hits the iron at this angle that makes everything look like it's still running, even though it's been still for 80 years. He was listening to her, fully. The same quality of attention from the car, from the cafe, from every conversation they'd had where she'd talked about buildings, and he'd let her and asked the next question. She was aware of this and made no effort to close it down. "I want to see those photographs," he said. "February 19th, she said. 7 p.m. "I know the date." "Then you know when to show up." She adjusted the camera bag on her shoulder. "Don't be late. Constantine will be there and he will find you and he will talk to you about the roasting machine for longer than is strictly necessary." "That seems manageable," he said. She looked at him, at the building behind him, at the sky that was doing its late winter thing. The last light going copper and then gray. The city's silhouette sharpening against it the way it always did at this hour. Every building becoming exactly what it was. "Walk with me," she said. He fell into step beside her without ceremony. His person stayed where they were. They walked north along Lenox Hill as the daylight went, past the buildings she knew by their bones. The textile warehouse with its oxidized copper, the converted bank, the row of narrow residences from the 30s with their original ironwork intact. And she told him about each one, not performing, not explaining, just talking the way she talked when she was inside her own expertise and didn't need to manage the impression it made. He listened. He asked questions. Not the obligatory kind, so the kind that came from actual curiosity, from someone who had been looking at the city for years from a completely different angle and was now finding a new one. At the corner of Lenox and Ardmore, she stopped and turned and took a photograph of the block behind them. The full street, the last copper light on the upper facades, everything still and composed the way the city was still, and composed sometimes for a few seconds at dusk before the night shift started. She showed him the image in the viewfinder. He looked at it, said nothing for a moment. "You see it differently than everyone else," he said. Not a compliment exactly. A statement of fact, the way he stated things. "I see it the way it actually is," she said. "Most people are too busy using it to look at it." He looked at the image a moment longer. Then he looked at her. "Thank you," he said. "For all of it, not just the documents." He paused. "For the Honda and the coffee and the wrong sign." She looked at him. At the man who had gotten into her car in the rain at 5 in the morning because he was tired of everything being calculated, and 20 minutes of ordinary was worth a complication. Who had protected her sister before she'd agreed to anything? Who had told her honestly that what he did bothered him and hadn't asked her to feel any particular way about it? Who looked at old buildings and asked the next question? "Thank you for not correcting me at the airport," she said. The corner of his mouth, the real version. "To wrong turns," he said. She looked at him for a long moment in the copper light on Lenox Hill, with the city going about its permanent, indifferent, magnificent business around them, and her camera in her hands, and the whole complicated weight of the past 2 weeks settling into something she didn't have a word for yet, but recognized. The way she recognized structures by their bones before she knew their names. "To wrong turns," she said. The light went. The city turned on its lights. They stood on the corner for a moment that had no particular urgency in either direction, and the buildings rose around them saying exactly what they were, and the night came in from the east the way it always did. Without announcement, without apology, patient as stone. She raised the camera one more time, shot the street, shot the light on the corner of Ardmore, shot the man standing beside her, looking at the city he'd moved through like weather for years, and was now, for the first time, being shown from the outside in. She looked at the last image in the viewfinder, kept all of them. She lowered the camera and they walked on through the ordinary dark, through the city that told the truth if you knew how to look, and the streets opened ahead of them without a map, and neither of them needed one.